of square-rigged sailing ships preparing to journey from Portsmouth to Botany Bay, just as they did exactly 200 years ago today on May the 13th, 1787. On board then were 700 convicts ready for transportation to an unknown land. Ahead lay a miserable and often tragic voyage that was to take 8 months, but when they landed, they gave birth to a nation, Australia. Welcome back to Portsmouth, a very special day for Australia and a day shared here in Britain by viewers on ITV and Channel 7 down under. It is, of course, a royal day. Her Majesty the Queen and Prince Philip are here for the ceremonies and celebrations. And in about an hour's time, they'll be sailing out into the Solent to review the replica First Fleet. Well, there'll be a signal to set sail and another epic voyage halfway around the world will begin again. A great moment for two nations and a story personified perhaps by one man. He is Dr. Jonathan King. He's the great-great-great-grandson of one of the original settlers, and he is about to relive history as he joins the First Fleet.
Well, it's probably the peak day in my professional life. It's taken me 10 years of hard labour to get this fleet of 11 ships here onto the Mother Bank, and it's probably the most exciting moment for Australia because the Bicentennial, the celebrations of our 200th birthday, are about to start any moment now.
Did you ever have any doubt that this magnificent fleet would sail today?
Well, there's an old saying from an American president, Thomas Jefferson, that the way a nation celebrates its anniversaries is a statement to the world of its own sense of destiny. And I've always been inspired by that, and I knew that Australia, as a great nation, couldn't let its 200th anniversary pass without one hell of a show. And I knew eventually the government and the people and the sponsors would come in behind me, and they've done it, and now we've got perhaps the most exciting bicentennial event of them all.
And even the Queen's here.
Well, we're really honoured that Her Majesty the Queen is going to sail out in HMS Sirius, and she's going to raise the flag that starts our celebrations. And for a moment, Australia is on the centre stage again, not only in Britain, but in around the world. It's another America's Cup, and I just can't wait for the moment when she actually raises the flag.
Wonderful pictures. Well, can I introduce you to Keith Geary, who is our resident reporter for Australia, although I hear you're a Kiwi, really.
There's lots of us there, actually, Fern. But standing by this gate takes me back to before I came over here to England to be involved in this whole project. I was looking through the records of convicts that were sent out, not only in the First Fleet, but in later ones too. And there's this theory that they're all sent to Australia, the whole lot of them, for stealing chickens. Well, it must have been no chickens left in England, but it's not true. Some of them are actually genuine criminals. They weren't nice people at all.
Weren't they?
No.
What did they get up to?
Well, I wouldn't like to say. We're in, mixed viewing times,
Yeah.
but some of them weren't nice people. That's one thing that I found out. The other thing, too, is that coming through this gate, there's a fair possibility, because they are of very little or poor educational standards, chances are they'd never seen a map. They probably didn't know where Australia was. So they were
This little Sallyport gate here was the last view they saw of their home, England.
Yeah. And it probably would have been a pretty grim one. I mean, the weather's beautiful here today in England, but chances are it could have been raining away back there. And they're getting out through the gate thinking, where are we going?
Well, there's a building over there, the Squareport. Now that can give us a great idea, a vivid portrayal of life aboard for those last convicts, because thanks to a new exhibition in that Square Town Museum, just a few yards along the quayside, the Queen and Prince Philip have been shown the exhibits, and this is what that they saw early this morning.
A sharp history lesson awaited the royal visitors. A story of squalor and degradation in which 700 miserable wretches were transported to a land they'd never heard of. And this is where the journey began 200 years ago. They set out from the Sallyport in Old Portsmouth. It was the last time they would see England. Ahead of them, 13,000 miles of sea, much of it uncharted. Soon after dawn on a May morning in 1787, the first of 11 square riggers weighed anchor from the Mother Bank, bound for Botany Bay. The candles flickered below decks, a sign of hope for the convicts who'd escaped the gallows, but they were fearful of what was to come. They'd been sentenced to transportation for life, found guilty of the most absurd crimes, like stealing a watch or a silk handkerchief.
'Twas at the Old Bailey session, the judge to me did say, the jury has found you guilty, you must go to Botany Bay.
The 18th century poor had to rely on pickpocketing in order to stay alive. The judges of the day, anxious to protect the property of their friends in the wealthy classes, sentenced thousands to the gallows or an uncertain future in the prison hulks. Hogarth's drawings of the time paint a wretched picture of the despair they faced. The jails were full, and so were the prison hulks. The air was foul, the food worse. Something had to be done. The answer lay with Captain Cook, who'd returned with stories of a land of plenty after exploring the eastern seaboard of Australia. It was Prime Minister William Pitt who sanctioned the settling of a penal colony there. Mary Parker had been tried and judged for stealing. Now she would sail with the First Fleet, one of 700 convicts bound for Australia. John Small, a highwayman, had time to reflect on his crimes at Newgate Prison, amid the dirt and the rats. 2 accomplices had been hanged, but a different fate awaited John Small on the other side of the world. An officer with the fleet remarked, "Never was there a more abandoned set of wretches collected in one place."
In the year of 86, in a dozen English necks, to over 700 convicts they did say, for the place you will be sent at King George's expense is halfway round the world to Botany Bay.
The Commodore of the fleet was Captain Arthur Phillip. No one else wanted the job, so he pressed ahead with the journey. He turned out to be the perfect choice, a born organizer who accomplished the voyage in 8 months. It was a masterpiece of planning, with enough provisions to keep the settlers alive for at least 2 years. On the 26th day of January, 1788, they made landfall at Sydney Cove in New South Wales. They found it to be a place of unspoiled beauty, filled with exotic birds and strange animals. The story goes that many of the convicts married and looked forward to a new life, a prospect denied them in the old country. This exhibition took 8 months to prepare, but does the story of the First Fleet have a message for today's generation?
I'm hoping that they will see the obvious parallel, that conditions then were broadly very similar to conditions today. The people who went on this trip were unemployed, had been found guilty of petty crime as a result, were hungry, deprived, and really at the bottom of the ladder. And yet they moved halfway around the world and created a new continent, a new nation as a result. And there is hope for those people. I hope that lesson will come across.
It was a hopeful day when the flag was raised to mark the founding of the settlement. The governor wrote about a shining light being lit among the nations of the Southern Hemisphere. How grand, he said, is the prospect that lies before this youthful nation. And now we go outside the square tower at the old Sallyport, where the Queen and Prince Philip have viewed the First Fleet exhibition. And a big moment for a little chap. 4-year-old Jethro Hocking steps up in plaid trousers there to present a posy of flowers to the Queen. He's the grandson of the leader of Portsmouth City Council. He's been waiting for more than an hour for this moment, but it passed off well. The Queen in a coat and hat of sapphire blue, matching the naval connection of the day. And here at the Sallyport now, Prince Philip, talking to some of the people who've been waiting here for some time. Schoolchildren there. Some of them had paintings which were on view in the Square Tower exhibition. The organisers first approached Prince Philip 2 years ago, asking if he could come along to see the First Fleet off today. He looked in his diary then and found that May the 13th was a blank day and said, yes, I can come, and I'll ask the Queen if she can come too. And that is why they're here. And now the Queen will shortly pass the memorial to those who gave their lives in the Falklands War in 1982. And we expect she will place her posy of flowers at the foot of that memorial as a tribute to their memory. It was from Portsmouth, of course, in April 1982 that the task force set out for the South Atlantic. As in all wars, some were called on to pay the supreme sacrifice, and their names are recorded in a tablet of stone in the harbour wall. To the men and women of the Royal Navy, the Royal Marines, Royal Fleet Auxiliary and Merchant Navy. Their names honoured, and today the Queen pays her own tribute to them. And now the Queen, walking on, shortly will pass another memorial, which she might well remember, as she unveiled it in 1980. There it is, 2 chains linked in friendship between Australia and Portsmouth. Very shortly, the chairman of the British-Australia Bicentennial Committee, Sir Peter Gadsden, will invite Her Majesty to unveil a plaque commemorating this day. Guard of the Cumberland Fort lined up there on the top of the harbour wall as the Queen unveils the plaque. The plaque records that on May the 13th, 1787, a fleet of 11 ships under the command of Arthur Phillip set sail from Portsmouth naval anchorage at Spithead. And now, because this is a day for the receiving and giving of gifts, the Queen is receiving a memento of her visit. It's an enamelled box which has a picture of the Young Endeavour, the sail training schooner that will be going to Australia later on this year. The royal couple will also receive gold medallions struck in honour of the day. And there you see the Queen inspecting her gift. A memory of the day, a day that will certainly go down in the history of both Portsmouth and Australia. The occasion is something of a relaxed one now. Very shortly, the Queen will be going on royal walkabout. Some consider that to be the very best bit of any royal day. And now Prince Philip, looking at his gold medal. I can tell you that it has a stern-side view of HMS Sirius on the front of the medal, and on the back is the crest of the city of Portsmouth. You can hear the bells of a local church ringing out there in the distance. Brilliant sunshine, a perfect day for this royal visit to Portsmouth. And now we come to the royal walkabout. This is the time when the people of Portsmouth have an opportunity to say hello to the Queen. The crowds, 5, 6, 10 deep in some places. They've waited a long time to present the Queen with their flowers. It's a well-tried and tested routine, this one, and it works superbly well. The Queen is always at her most relaxed when she's on royal walkabout. Coincidentally, as this is an Australian day, it's worth remembering that the walkabout was first tried in New Zealand and Australia during royal tours in the late 60s and early 70s. It was so successful that it's now regarded as an essential part of any royal day. This is the time when the Queen comes closer to her people, and it gives her the chance to meet and talk with them and for them to say hello to her. It goes without saying that the Royal Walkabout is not without its risks, as it does bring the Queen and other members of the royal family in such close contact with the public. And I suppose if the Queen's bodyguards were being honest at this moment, they'd probably prefer any walkabout to be cancelled on the grounds that the risk isn't worth the taking. But that is precisely why the Queen insists on going on with it. She believes that as Queen she must see and be seen, and that means meeting her subjects. The Queen now has an armful of flowers, and more coming too, from the three daughters, the three little girls of Dr. Jonathan King. Sweet little curtsies there, and 3 posies of flowers from 3 pretty girls. Jonathan King, you heard earlier, talking to Gareth Evans. And that's a proud moment for them. Their father, of course, is directly descended from the First Fleeters, the great-great-great-great-grandson of the man who mustered the original fleet in 1787. And so it's a happy day, a relaxed day, just the way the Queen and Prince Philip enjoy it. Earlier this morning in Guildhall Square, there were 20 arrests, hecklers who were protesting about the bicentennial celebrations, allied to an Aboriginal group. But the Queen saw nothing of it, and the routine has progressed smoothly. Royal watchers might like to know that that vivid sapphire blue coat is one that she wore when she went to the Royal Maunday service at Chichester 2 years ago. So it's the second time that this outfit has been seen by people here in the south of England. And now the Queen and Prince Philip prepare to depart after a very relaxed walkabout. And they'll be moving on to the next engagement of the day.
Looking at the wrong car.
A special bouquet to the Queen.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what was in the bouquet? You were showing what was in there.
There's Dorota and bottle brush and wattle.
I couldn't hear. I couldn't hear any of that. Say it again.
There's kangaroo paw
No.
and bottle brush
And
water and gum nuts.
and what did she think about all that?
Oh, she liked it.
And this was typically Australian flowers, okay?
And then all the way from Australia. And then the Duke of Edinburgh goes, there must be a wattle somewhere in there. And then we go, no. And then he goes, how dare you live in that? And then he laughed.
Did you see the Queen had that one in her hand as she drove off? She didn't put it.
Yes.
Now, there's a very special historical importance why you three are here. Can I elect you spokesman? Why are you here today?
Well, my dad was the birth founder of the fleet when the 11 Squarigas go out, and so we're here to say goodbye to it.
He is Jonathan King, isn't he?
Yeah, and he's going to go away for 8 months.
When did you say goodbye to him?
We haven't yet.
When do you see him to say goodbye?
Soon, today, after lunch.
Have you been on board the boat that he sails on? What is he sailing on?
The Soren Larsen, and then the Bounty.
Oh, when does he get onto the Bounty?
Halfway, yeah.
I see. Now you're going to miss him when he's away.
We went on the first leg from London to Portsmouth, and we're going on the last leg from Fremantle to Sydney.
Are you a good sailor?
Sort of.
And what about your father then? What's he been up to in the last few days? Is he excited?
He's very busy. He's been rushing around, going to parties and interviews and things. He's been working on it for the last 10 years, so.
And how old are you?
10.
So it's before you were born, practically. And how old are you?
7.
Can we go through your names? You are?
Molly, Loanna.
Loanna. Forgot your name for a second there, yes?
Bryony.
Bryony. And tell us again, now the bouquet and the Queen, did you think you'd be able to get to her?
Oh, it was very hard because the man said that we wouldn't be able to, but we just snuck in. He said you definitely can't, but we sneaked in.
You definitely couldn't.
First he said, well, you can stand over there and then you can give it to it. Then he came back and said,
only Loanna can do it, and then he said you definitely can't do it.
So what did
So
you
we
do
just
then?
sneaked in. We just went over.
Well, girls, thank you very much indeed. Good luck to your father. Good luck to all of you when you're sailing your little legs that you do. And well done with the Queen. Any message for the Queen, because she's bound to be watching?
Thank you very much for letting us talk to you and give... Yeah, cozy. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. The Queen and Prince Philip will be boarding HMS Sirius shortly, ready to sail out into the Solent to review the fleet. And there is Sirius dressed overall. And we'll be seeing the Queen and Sirius as they sail past here, Old Portsmouth Harbour, in about 15 minutes' time. But first of all, we're going to look at some of the stories of perhaps the most famous of the convicts sent to Australia.
Bob Hawke, this is your life. Well, maybe not, but you'd almost expect Hawkey to pop out of one of these cottages around here. We're at Tolpuddle in Dorset, and it was from here in 1834 that the 6 martyrs were sent out to Australia. That, of course, had a huge effect on unionism, not only here in Britain, but right around the world. Oh, by the way, Bob, if you're watching, you can pop out for a cup of tea now, because you probably know all this.
Under this tree, a bloke called George Lovelace organised the first farm workers' union to try and get better wages and conditions, something current union leader Oliver Trevitt is familiar with.
The employers around this area reduced the wages to 9 shillings and then to 8 shillings, and they then threatened to reduce them even further to 7 shillings a week.
I mean, wages are supposed to go the other way, aren't they?
Normally, one would expect wages to rise, but at that particular time, they did fall back quite considerably. It was not illegal to actually form a trade union, even in those far-off days. What they were charged with eventually was taking part in some trumped-up illegal oath ceremony.
So basically they were getting the bums rush, weren't they?
That's right, yes, that's right.
This gear was standard issue for potential Australian citizens many years ago and helps to explain why Dorset has never produced any top sprinters. Still, you do get to have a leisurely look at the surroundings and a feel for the pace of the time, courtesy Tolpuddle Tours, Oliver and his mate Ron Dyer.
Ron, what part did religion play in the whole Tolpuddle story?
Oh, religion played an enormous part in the story of the martyrs, because the 2 brothers, James and George Lovelace, they were both lay preachers. Actually, this where we are sat now was the original site of the chapel that they used to preach in.
So we're in church right now?
Exactly.
Well, I do feel a touch on the reverend side, I must confess, Ron.
Actually, the local reverend was the villain of the piece. After agreeing to back the workers in their negotiations with the squire, he suddenly developed amnesia and went back on his word.
They let them down real bad.
Right, is he buried round here?
I wouldn't know. I've never bothered to find out.
I don't suppose anybody has, have they?
So betrayed, the 6 faithful and brave men fell into the arms of the local constabulary and were marched the 7 miles to Dorchester in, as they called it, their jewellery. I only made it to the edge of town. The 6 men got 7 years and a one-way ticket down under.
Well, there was such a hue and cry about the 6 men being transported out to Australia that eventually they were given a pardon and came back to England in 1836-37. They did come to Tolpuddle, but they didn't stay here. 5 of them eventually went on to Canada. The only one that did, and he rests here, was James Hammett. Not that he's exactly got eternal peace. He's only about 25 feet from an A road. In fact, the most dangerous thing in Tolpuddle these days is you're likely to get run over. And they're a bit hard on their tourists as well.
The other permanent monument to the martyrs are these cottages built by the Trades Union Congress in 1934 for retired farm workers. 153 years down the track, which union would the martyrs belong to today?
The Agricultural and Allied Workers Trade Group of the Transport and General Workers Union.
Have you got a shorter name for that, mate?
Well, it's abbreviated to AAWTG of the T and GWU.
Well, with me now are some of the descendants, not of the Tolpuddle martyrs, but of the people who sailed on the First Fleet. There's the Hibbert family, 3 generations. We have grandfather, his daughter, Anne, and her 2 sons. Now, Nicholas, you were one of the little boys who travelled on the Royal Mail coach today, did you?
Yes.
What was it like?
It's fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
And did you have to carry the Queen's message in your hand?
No.
But you saw it?
Yeah.
You didn't have a sneak read of it?
I had a copy of it.
You had a copy of it? Well, you're 7th generation. Your mum is 6th generation. Your father is 5th
generation. My name's Winton McClure. Nothing to do with the Hibbards, you see.
Oh, don't confuse. I'm not going to confuse me, but can I just... This is your son and your husband as well, Mr. Hibbert. Can I just also introduce you to a long-lost relative? This is Greg Small from Australia, who is part of John Small, who was sailed on the first fleet, did he not? Do you know what your relation is yet?
No, I'm not too sure at all.
Very, very long lost cousins, I should think.
They're cousins, very much removed.
Yes.
Have you gone into the history of this?
Oh yes, a certain amount of it.
Yes, but we didn't know about Greg, I'm afraid.
I'm a fifth cousin.
It's nice to have met him now.
It certainly is. Just tell us, what was John Small?
He was an
highway robber?
Ex-Marine.
Oh, well, we're going to hear more about this later after the break. Welcome back to Australia's 200th birthday celebrations. The Queen and Prince Philip are on Sirius, and I think we can see it coming up the river in a minute. But first of all, we're going to talk to some more descendants and Keith Geary down at the Sallyport. Keith.
I'm going to... Oh, we're here. OK, well, I've got with me Glenn. Glenn, your relatives actually were a bit on the sly side. I understand they borrowed something that wasn't theirs.
Yeah, I mean, my uncle was pretty hungry, right? He got this loaf of bread at the shop. He got this Brit gets the win there first off, so he got in trouble and got chucked to Sydney.
So how long did he get?
Life.
Alive?
What do you expect? Yeah.
Life, OK. Well, one of the things, at the moment we're waiting for Sirius to come. And this is a little part of history that will be a continuing part for England. This is how things happen, I suppose. It is payment for one rivet, and it was a penny payment. It came from the dockyards where Sirius, the ship that the Queen will be going out to see the fleet in, was built on the 6th of the 4th, 1938. And that's the sort of thing that is in all sorts of houses around here. In fact, we've got it off the gentleman whose house we've got our camera on top of today. So that's a little souvenir. You're not allowed to...
I can't take that?
No, you haven't got the same traits as your relatives, have you, Glenn?
No, never what you said. No, never.
OK, so that's from us down here at the Sallyport Gate.
Is this serious? My mum will see that.
Sirius is approaching us down the river. You can just see it as it's behind me there. The Royal Standard is indeed flying, which means the Queen, of course, is on board with Prince Philip. They are just leaving the naval base. They're heading out towards the fleet of 11 square riggers in the Solent. And I think perhaps Chris Peacock can see the pictures and talk us through it. Chris.
Thank you, Fern. Looking out now towards Portsmouth Naval Base, the Queen and Prince Philip boarded the frigate HMS Sirius just 5 minutes ago. And they're now being escorted to the entrance of Portsmouth Harbour and out towards the Mother Bank in the Solent, where they have a date with history. The Queen and the Prince are aboard the Leander-class frigate HMS Sirius, chosen for the occasion because she's the namesake of the first naval ship Sirius, which was the flagship when the first fleet of convicts left for Australia. And there you see them, Queen and Prince Philip, waving to the crowds massed on the mainland. That vivid blue coat standing out so well. The Queen, when she dresses for a royal occasion, wants to be seen, and today that coat does the job very nicely, thank you. And so there we see HMS Sirius on its way to the Mother Bank with a 21-gun salute being fired from HMS Dolphin in her honour. HMS Sirius is Portsmouth's adopted warship, built in the city dockyard in 1966 at a time when Portsmouth was still building warships. Today the ship under the command of Commander Stephen Saunders. This is a famous stretch of waterway, possibly the most famous stretch of naval waterway in the world. For up this way, for centuries past, British fleets have set out to defend Britain's maritime interests. And hallowed names like Nelson, Rodney and Collingwood have set out this way to conquer kingdoms, and indeed to add to our empire. And so, HMS Sirius making about 8 knots now as she moves out towards the mouth of Portsmouth Harbour and then across to the Mother Bank. It'll take her about 20 minutes, HMS Sirius, to reach the Mother Bank. The Mother Bank is about 8 miles from Portsmouth and 1 mile from Ryde Pier off the Isle of Wight. It's a calm day now. There was a stiff northwesterly wind earlier, but as you can see from the Queen's Standard that is flying there from HMS Sirius, the wind has abated somewhat, and it's smooth sailing for the royal party as they slowly make their way out of Portsmouth Harbour. There is a precedence on occasions such as this for the way that this particular squadron moves along the water. The Trinity House vessel Patricia will be in front of HMS Sirius, escorting the Queen and Prince Philip. The Queen will know this stretch of water well because the Royal Yacht Britannia is based in Portsmouth, and many times she will have boarded the Royal Yacht and headed out for tours abroad. And so it's a perfect scene as we now await the highlight of the day, which will be the Queen reviewing a fleet of 11 square riggers which are now waiting at anchor off the Mother Bank, ready for the Queen's arrival. And there we see them, an aerial picture now of those little tiny riggers. They look so small as we see the view from our helicopter. It's taken 10 years to assemble a fleet of this particular size. The organisers searched the world for 11 ships capable of taking on a journey of some 13,000 miles, all the way from Portsmouth to Australia. It is quite something to think that on this very day, 200 years ago, on May the 13th, 1787, this was exactly how the picture would have looked on the Mother Bank, just off the Isle of Wight, when that fleet would have set sail. And there you see the Queen's squadron now, heading out towards the Mother Bank. Trinity House vessel Patricia in front, HMS Sirius in the middle, and bringing up the rear, the minesweeper HMS Blackwater. This is the Queen's squadron for the day, and this is the way that the squadron will review the fleet. They will pass down the fleet in this particular order, and it will take them something like 7 or 10 minutes for the review to be completed. There you see in the left hand of your picture there something of the crowd that have gathered to see this marvellous occasion. One is reminded, looking at these pictures, of the Jubilee Spithead Review of 1977, when the Queen was last here. Spithead isn't where she's going to today. She's going a few miles to the west, to the Mother Bank. But we shall be returning very shortly once the Queen and Prince Philip have made their rendezvous with the First Fleet.
To visit the First Fleet 200 years after they first set sail here for Australia from Portsmouth. Well, in just over half an hour, the Queen and Prince Philip will watch as the replica fleet of square riggers set sail on the same 8-month epic voyage. And we will, of course, bring you all of those pictures. There are no prisoners on board this time, but the ships will be carrying a selection of gifts. And believe it or not, a house. Arthur Phillip, the captain of the original fleet, who later became the first governor of Australia, used to live in the New Forest in Hampshire. Now, his home has just been rediscovered, and it's been decided to ship it brick by brick back to Australia.
These crumbling brick walls in a Lyndhurst back garden may not look very historic, but for Jeff Cotty, a company director from Sydney, they represent the end of a relentless search for the home of Arthur Phillip, the man who in 1787 took the first convicts to a penal colony in New South Wales. After Captain Cook's parents' home was shipped out to Australia from England, Jeff decided he'd do the same with Arthur Phillips's home, if he could find it and if there was anything left of it. During many trips to Britain, he pored over public records and old maps, and to his delight, he found that the house called Vernal's Cottage still existed.
I drove down here, and when I saw the nameplate on the cottage, my heart leapt. I thought, I found it. I then asked the lady living in the house, was this Phillips Cottage? And she said, I'm sorry, this house was only built comparatively recently, 30-odd years ago. I felt terribly disappointed. But before letting me go, and when I explained why I came here, she said, I believe I know where something is that you can find. So she took me through the gate, behind the hedge, and there was this ruin.
Having got the owner's permission to move the ruin, Jeff made plans to take the 6,000 bricks home. He gave one each to the ships reenacting the First Fleet, and an Australian container firm offered to take the rest free of charge.
Handled sympathetically and properly located, I'm sure it will be noteworthy. I'm just an ordinary citizen. And I feel that it doesn't happen to many people that in their lifetime they can participate in a historical project directly to make a gift to the nation without any strings attached.
A little piece of history en route from Portsmouth to Botany Bay. We can probably spare the odd old house, though, because England is still rich in fine, stately homes and castles. One of the most popular near here is Bewley. Keith Geary couldn't resist a visit.
Well, they reckon an Englishman's home is his castle. Of course, that's not the case for everybody here in England, but for the fortunate few, there's still the odd little place like this tucked away. We're at Bewley, which is down by the Solent, and it's in Hampshire. Now, yours truly has managed to con himself an invite. And it's Reggie Deege, look at this. Lord Montague requests the pleasure of the company of Mr. Keith Geary at Palace House, Bewley, for afternoon tea. Well, it's nearly tea time, so we'll pop in and see how it goes, all right?
Good afternoon, Keith.
G'day, Trev. How's
Welcome
things?
to Bewley.
Thanks, mate.
Come in, please.
Good on you.
Trev's been buttling here 24 years, man and boy. Pretty rare these days, butlers.
Will you follow me then, Keith, please?
Good as gold, mate.
Struth, some of these pictures are so old they're cracked. It's a shame, really. The current Baron Montague of Bewley is related to all sorts of well-known names. Mary Queen of Scots, James I, Charles I and II, Sir Walter Scott.
Keep you fit this, Trev?
It certainly does.
Walking through a place like Palace House, you get the feeling they're all still around, watching. James I used to visit the place in the 17th century, and this bloke commemorates the fact that the first Royal Command performance of football took place here in 1613, after the bear baiting and before the bull baiting.
Mr. Keith Geary, Lord Montague.
Thanks, Trev.
Hello, how are you?
How are you, sir? You well?
Sit down and have some tea.
Thanks very much indeed. Just take this off.
Right. Well, come sit on the sofa here.
Good as gold. Here we go.
Right, good.
Well, how long have your family been, as it were, in residence here at Bewley?
Well, really since 1538, when my ancestor bought Bewley from Henry VIII at the time of the dissolution of the monastery.
So you're pretty much settled in then,
I think so. Milk and sugar.
Thank you very much.
When Henry VIII dissolved a monastery, he didn't muck around. The abbey took 100 years to build, but it came down like a concrete kite to provide stones for Henry's Solent forts. Oh, the radar's extra.
What's the best bit about being a lord? And what's the worst bit about being a lord?
I think the best bit is sometimes helps you book a table in a restaurant. And the worst bit is if you get caught speeding, it's in every newspaper.
Not really surprising that his lordship occasionally gets nicked for speeding. Look what he keeps in his garage. But to be fair, the place does double up as the National Motor Museum, and it includes a vehicle which is familiar to many Australians.
Well, Bluebird, of course, I was a great friend of Donald Campbell, and of course it gave us great delight when he broke the record in Lake Eyre. And then some years ago we were able to persuade the widow to sell it to the nation, and the nation helped us buy it, and now it's a permanent exhibit here, together with three other land speed record cars, the Golden Arrow and the two Sunbeams.
Lord Montague's pretty keen on driving the contents of his garage, and not just up to the corner shop either.
I'd always wanted to drive from Perth to Adelaide, so I'm shipping my 1914 Rolls-Royce there, and I shall be accompanied by His Royal Highness Prince Michael of Kent, and we'll be driving to Adelaide and then up to Canberra.
Well, good news, you lot. They've got the road sealed now.
So I hear, yes.
It's all right.
And I shan't be going alone. I shall be going with some other veteran vintage cars from Perth.
Obviously, being a lord today is a lot different from your ancestors.
Sure, it sure is, but on the other hand, I always like to think that these great houses, which were built originally for the pleasure of a few, should now be enjoyed by the many. So we are now living above the shop, and we are giving pleasure to about 500,000 people a year. And this house may look large, but we only live in very few rooms.
And bits of it.
And we even have meals in the kitchen, too.
Get away.
Eating in the kitchens is all right, it's finding the kitchens that's the problem. You probably have to live here for 600 years to suss the joint out. Nasty spot you got there, son. Still, being a visitor, you get everything laid on.
Do you like a cucumber sandwich or a brandy snap?
Well, I'm not big on the green things, but I love that. I got a sweet tooth. What about you?
Yeah, or the brandy, too.
Oh, is it real brandy in here?
No.
Oh.
Used to be.
Times are crook, aren't they?
And while Keith Geary's been shaking up some of the stateliest homes of England, the Red Arrows are shaking up the skies here over the Solent, doing a fabulous display. Meanwhile, out in the Solent, the crews on the square riggers are making their last-minute adjustments now, ready to cheer Her Majesty the Queen as she sails by and gives the signal for the voyage to Botany Bay to get underway. It is a remarkable project involving some remarkable people and boats, as Christopher Peacock has found out.
Brigantines and brigantines, square-rigged sailing ships, following in the wake of the first fleet that set out from Portsmouth on this very day 200 years ago to found modern Australia.
Singing Turalaya-dee, sing Turalaya-dee, Turalaya-dee, we're bound for Botany Bay.
It took 10 years to assemble a replica fleet of 11 ships capable of crossing the Atlantic twice and then heading for the Cape of Good Hope, through the Indian Ocean to Mauritius and on to Sydney, Australia. The organisers have searched the world to find a fleet of square riggers capable of withstanding the 13,000-mile voyage. Jonathan King was the man behind the idea and the great-great-great-grandson of the man who mustered the original fleet.
We're proud that we were founded as a convict colony. We're so proud that we're reminding the world by reenacting the voyage with fare-paying passengers. And we've got people booking on now for the adventure holiday experience. Now that's 200 years later, us standing up and saying to the world, we were founded as a penal colony, we're proud of it, look what we've done, and we're doing it again.
And so it was to be. This was the scene a fortnight ago when the fleet set sail from London bound for Portsmouth, the first stopover on a 7-leg journey. This is one of the beauties of the fleet, a 3-masted movie star called Bounty, built as a full-scale replica for the remake of the film Mutiny on the Bounty. Another ship with film star pedigree is the Soren Larsen, a 2-masted brigantine which was the star of the TV series The Oneidin Line. The first leg from the Pool of London took 4 days, and it caught the imagination of the crew.
you feel civilization slowly sinking away from you, and you sort of, hearties, it comes on like that. It's great.
This would be the largest fleet to make a long ocean passage since the days of sail. The crowds gathered at Portsmouth, sailors mustered to check the rigging, even the soldiers were drilling on the hard. Life before the mast has a storybook glamour, but this won't be a holiday for those aboard. 1,400 places have been offered to passengers acting as trainee crews. Alan Garth paid £14,000 for the round trip. He mortgaged his house and gave up his job to swab the decks.
It'll be toughish. The boats are very well equipped, very well crewed by the professionals, very well founded ships. So I've got every confidence in them. I'd prefer to go to Australia on one of these than, say, something like the QE2, to be honest.
It certainly wasn't going to be a luxury cruise for the fare-paying passengers. They would be expected to man the rigging, helped by professional crewmen like Californian-born Brian Whitford.
An experience just begins when you start, and so we remember that. We try not to give them too much to learn at one time, and yet they become confident very quickly. We learn from them, and hopefully they have a good time. The fact that with the traditional rig, you're not using any winches or any hydraulics or anything, it's just muscle and learn to make the best use of the wind, and they're just beautiful ships to be on.
Apart from essential chores like washing up, very few of the fare-paying passengers have any real experience of sailing. Most of them were drawn to it by a sense of adventure and the chance of escape from ordinary life. Anne Schooler from Canada has just one worry, and it's not how to grind coffee.
Frostbite. I have had several cases of frostbite when I lived above the Arctic Circle teaching Eskimos. And I find that when the weather gets very cold and damp, it affects my fingers and it hurts like the dickens.
Claire Puntis from Southsea in Hampshire considers herself the luckiest girl afloat. She was tipped for a place aboard the sail training ship Young Endeavour, Britain's gift to Australia, but failed the final selection. However, to make up for her disappointment, she was offered a free place to Australia with the fleet.
I'm so lucky to even have a place to go. Obviously 200 years ago they were only taking convicts, and now I'm really fortunate to be following in the historic voyage.
This is the Tucker Thompson, a plucky little topsail schooner rigged as a barkentine and the smallest vessel of the fleet. She was built as a labour of love by her captain, Todd Thompson. The ship was the inspiration of his father, Tucker Thompson, who died before the hull was completed. Todd took over the work and went on to make his father's dream come true, christening the ship the R. Tucker Thompson in his memory.
Well, we're pretty happy with the ship. We've just sailed up from New Zealand. We've done 12,000 miles in the last 5 months, coming up virtually direct. We've had lots of good weather and we've had some bad weather. It's good to have behind us, knowing the ship will stand up to it.
Another ship looking for breath from the wind is the Kaskelot. A sister ship of the Soren Larsen, she was built in the early 1940s in Denmark, making her debut in the film Scott of the Antarctic. The sailing of the First Fleet coincided with the report on the loss of the Marquise in a tall ships race off Bermuda. 19 people lost their lives, and the Board of Trade insisted on tighter regulations. The risk of putting the Bicentennial fleet to sea for 8 months wasn't lost on Executive Director Wally Franklin.
Well, the tougher regulations, I think, have been a great help to us. I think they've strengthened the ships and the crews. We have all learnt a great deal from the Marquise inquiry and the process involved. There are no surprises for us. We have worked in close consultation with the Board of Trade Marine Directorate over the last 2 years. It was they who we approached to determine what the standards would be. And during the course of the Marquise inquiry, we've kept in very close contact, and we have been able to ensure that the ships have also maintained that same contact, and that these ships are of a standard that can do this trip.
In a moment, the Queen gives the signal to the fleet and you interpret some British place names.
Pig's Bottom.
Thank you. Well, HMS Sirius with the Queen is getting very near to the First Fleet. But first of all, Keith, what do you mean by Pig's Bottom?
Well, Pig's Bottom's actually a place out near where I'm staying at Bewley in the New Forest. And I suppose for people in England, they're so accustomed to seeing these names every day of the week that it really makes no difference to them. But we've strung a bunch of them together, and you are not going to believe the first place I ended up at.
Okay.
Sandy Balls, just one of the little spots you can come to if you're having a tour around the English countryside. Now, quite why it's called Sandy Balls, we're not sure, because we're about 15 miles from the sea, and the bloke that runs this joint is definitely not called Sandy. Doesn't bear thinking about, does it? Now, Five-Head Neville is not a Scots bloke who's taken his mates, Hazelberry Brian and Oakford Fitzpaine, for a weekend in the country, if you know what I mean. Looks like my kind of place. They're not kidding, you know. Idle. Now, there's a place for a bloke like me, but it's way up north and take a bit of an effort to get to Bradford. But if you do manage to get there, you can join the Idle Working Men's Club. On the other hand, if you're not the idle type, you can go down to Kent and enjoy the company of the Sheilas at the Loose Women's Institute. And further up in Essex, there's the Ugly Women's Institute. I understand they got a bit fraught about the Ugly Women's Institute, so they're now the Women's Institute Ugly Division. Now, if you want a beer, you've got to go down here to Devon. And if you want a sandwich, well, there's one in Kent. Or you could pop down here to the Piddle Inn by the River Piddle in the Piddle Valley and do what you like. Well, to finish our little tour, we've popped up here to Upham. Now, if you're coming to Upham, make sure you come up the hill to Upham and don't go down the bottom to Lower Upham. This business of silly names for places also extends to people's houses and cottages here in England, I've discovered. And we're going to pop down the road and see a bloke who's got to have a sense of humour. John.
G'day, Keith. How are you, mate?
Miles, how's things, mate? Now, listen, what's this hoop-it business?
Now, hoop-it, mate, that's something to do with coffee. This is Whoppit.
So that would make your address?
That makes our address Whoppit, Upham.
Whoppit, Upham, right.
That's right, Keith.
And I understand there's something about the police up here.
Oh, you heard that one, are you?
Yeah.
The policeman who used to be down at the station here, his name was Fawcett.
Right.
Ask me how he answered the phone.
How did he answer the phone?
Fawcett Upham.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, and what's worse, he got taken over by his new assistant from Winchester, and his name was Wright. How did he answer the phone?
Right,
Upham.
Could only happen in England.
Keith Geary discovering England the only way that he can, of course. I don't think there's anything odd in that at all. Now, with us are two ladies who actually met the Queen and Prince Philip this morning, and I think Prince Philip spoke to you both. First of all, let me introduce you. You are Karen.
That's correct.
And you're Claire. What do you both do?
We're students at Portsmouth College, doing Spanish.
Reading Spanish, both
Yes,
of you?
yes,
and,
that's right.
and so what happened this morning?
Well, we came down about 9:30 this morning, and there were all the preparations of the police here. We were about the first people to come, so we had a very good place to stand.
Yes, and then Prince Philip approached you?
Yes.
What did he say?
We were standing right by the plaque, so he came over to us and he asked us if we were waiting for a passage to go to Australia.
What did he say?
We said yes, we were.
Are you?
No.
And then what else did he say?
He asked us if we were Australian. I don't know if we sounded Australian, but he asked us anyway. He was lovely. He was so nice.
Did you speak to the Queen as well?
No, she passed on because some people next door to us had got some flowers, so she went to pick those up and carried on walking.
What did she look like close to?
Well, she was lovely. She seemed much younger. She seemed very natural. She was lovely, very distinguished.
Oh, and did she look warm? Because it's jolly cold up here, isn't it?
She had a lovely big coat on, so she covered it up very well.
Do you think perhaps some other members of the royal family were going to come?
Well, we were hoping so, but we understand that perhaps Princess Anne might be coming later on in the year.
Oh, great.
Because I think the rest of the royal family are coming down for another visit in a few weeks' time.
You're obviously great royalists.
Yes.
Do you watch all the other royal events?
Yes, we saw the royal wedding, so anything that's going on we'll come down and see.
And how long are you going to stay up here and watch as we see Sirius drifting off in the distance?
Yes. We've just been watching the red arrows. That was lovely.
Weren't they fantastic?
They were super, yeah.
I wonder what those descendants, the first fleeters would have thought if they'd seen the red arrows going over their heads now. Well, anyway, we're going to go back to our resident Australian who's down talking to some more people. Keith.
I have with me Mr. Alan Rawlings now, and you've got a very interesting letter here.
Yes, I have. This was written 200 years and 3 days ago, on May the 10th, 1787, by a midshipman who was on the Sirius, the main escort vessel to the First Fleet.
And we should explain that's the original Sirius.
The original Sirius. Here's the date, 1787. And he's writing to his father in Devon, in England, saying that this, in all probability, is the last letter you will get from me before we leave England. Captain Phillip came on board yesterday and talks of sailing tomorrow. He then goes on to say that we have not yet been paid any advance. It will be paid today and supposed only 2 months. The men murmur very much, as most of them have 6 months pay due.
Now, does anybody know what actually happened to this fellow? What was his name, by the way?
His name was Midshipman Newton Fowle. He did get to Australia with the fleet, and you have a famous painting, I believe, showing the founding of Australia with the raising of the flag with 8 British naval officers standing around. Well, he was one of the 8 in that original picture.
And this is his letter 200
and this
years...
is his letter to his father before he sailed. And I understand that he subsequently went to Norfolk Island and then to Batavia, and sadly died of fever when he was about 20 or 21, because he was only 16 years old when he wrote this letter.
Well, thanks for sharing it with us today, Alan. And it's back to you, Fern.
Thank you very much, Keith. Well, we've just had the word that the crux of the entire day, the huge climax of the Queen on board Sirius giving the signal to the First Fleet is about to happen. And the man with the pictures and the voice is young Chris Peacock. Chris.
And so the moment has come as the Royal Squadron with the Queen and Prince Philip aboard HMS Sirius, arriving shortly off the Mother Bank, and will proceed down the line. There's the Trinity House vessel Patricia, which is the escort to HMS Sirius. There is a precedent to be observed when the Queen is at sea that the Trinity House ship Patricia must precede her. And she's carrying with her some of the elder brethren of Trinity House. A good deal of discipline to be observed on this day. And there we see the Patricia. There are also a number of sailing craft and pleasure boats who've turned out today to see this spectacle. And there we see something of them. Not since the great days of sail, I suppose, has a fleet of 11 square riggers been mustered for a day like this. There you see something of the sailing craft beginning to dodge and weave around the square riggers. There we see HMS Sirius. HMS Sirius there coming up towards the Mother Bank. And behind her, HMS Blackwater. Now, very shortly, when the Queen sails down the line, she will review the fleet of 11 ships. And when she reaches the end of the line, the signal will be given, proceed to your destination. And after that, the fleet will set sail westward ho for the first of a 7-leg journey, which will take them to the Canary Islands, Tenerife, down to Rio de Janeiro, across the Atlantic to the Cape of Good Hope, on through Mauritius, finally making landfall in Sydney, Australia. It's taken 10 years to muster the fleet for this day. They had to search the world to find square riggers that would be capable of making a 13,000-mile voyage. And that coastline that you see there will be the Isle of Wight. The Mother Bank, a spit of water, is but 1 mile from the coastline of the Isle of Wight. There's a good deal of rivalry today between the island and between Portsmouth. Portsmouth will tell you that they were the people who gave birth to modern Australia. The Isle of Wight will say, yes, but we watered and victualled the Mother Fleet as it waited overnight on the Mother Bank to set off for Australia. The truth of the matter is that the Mother Bank belongs to neither the Isle of Wight nor to Portsmouth. The Queen has been gracious enough to visit both places today. And there we see the Lord Nelson, just one of the square riggers taking part in today's parade of sail. The Lord Nelson was built by the Jubilee Sailing Trust. She's a three-masted bark, which sets out ordinarily to provide sailing holidays for the disabled. She was christened by the Duchess of York just before her wedding last summer. Nelson will not be going to Australia. She's here today for the colour. She's here, if you like, to make up the numbers. For only 8 of the square riggers will finally set sail for Australia from the Mother Bank. 3 more will join them down in Tenerife to make up the numbers. But there we see the Lord Nelson, the Jubilee Sailing Trust ship. And there you see HMS Sirius in the background with a flotilla of tugs and small ships clustered round her. She will be flying a special message as she proceeds down the line, which says very simply, we wish you a very happy voyage. You may now proceed to your destination. It's a simple message for what is an epic voyage. A voyage that would seem unimaginable if you think back and try and put yourselves in the minds of the people who set out 200 years ago on this very day. Somebody said to me it was rather like sending a wooden spaceship to Mars. The convicts who set out on that day had no idea where they were going. They'd never heard of Australia. And they were fearful indeed of their fate. Now there's a beautiful square rigger. She is the Amarina, the pride of Swedish seafarers, and I'm told the most luxurious ship in the fleet. She has a strong iron hull, which also makes her the most secure. And there you can see the crew lining the yards. 1,400 places were offered to fare-paying passengers on this particular trip. Not all of them have been filled, but there are more than 1,000 people who are sailing on this voyage, some of whom have no experience at all of sailing whatsoever. Some of them have never been to sea. This must be a very exciting moment for them as they line the yards, ready to cheer HMS Sirius, which you can see in the background there, as she sails down the line. The trainee crews will be accompanied by professionals. Professional crews are aboard all the square riggers to ensure that they're looked after, to nurse and guide and counsel them, and make sure that they know what they're about. There's the Royalist just passing there through your picture, a sail training ship with the familiar checkered hull. HMS Sirius travelling at about 8 knots. Queen and Prince Philip reviewing the fleet from the starboard side of the bridge. There was a strict inspection by the Board of Trade to ensure that all ships would pass muster. They had in their minds the thought that after the sinking of the Marquise, with the loss of 19 lives, that they would have to make their safety regulations stricter. And all the square riggers that are on parade today have had to pass a very severe test to ensure that they're seaworthy. HMS Sirius continuing to make her way up the line. And in the background there you see something of the Isle of Wight. When the Queen has completed her review here, she will go to the Isle of Wight. Now there's HMS Bounty. Now Bounty only just made today by the skin of her teeth. She failed a Board of Trade inspection only yesterday when she was due to set sail from Portsmouth because she didn't have the right type of life raft. And as somebody said, someone's got to throw Bounty a lifeline. And overnight, someone came up with the right life rafts, and there she is today, the Bounty, inspired by the movie maker David Lean, built in 1979 in New Zealand for the remaking of the Mel Gibson movie, Mutiny on the Bounty. And there you see the crew manning the yards. This is a very different review to what Her Majesty is normally used to. I said to you earlier, normally she'd be coming to this particular stretch of water for the Spithead review, which is an immaculate job with the Navy in full attendance. But I'm sure that the spirit of today's parade of sail and the warmth of the greeting from the square riggers is just as warm as anything that she receives from Spithead. HMS Sirius, the adopted ship of the city of Portsmouth, a Leander-class frigate, and of course, most important, the namesake of the very first HMS Sirius that set out with such high hopes for Australia 200 years ago. There is the Soren Larsen. The Soren Larsen, the flagship of the fleet. She'll be the leader for the voyage. Commodore Mike Kitchenside, captain of the fleet, will make all the decisions for the voyage from this particular ship. Television viewers may recognise her as the ship used in the series The Oneidin Line, a two-masted brigantine and quite a movie star with a proven record of ocean voyage. A worthy flagship. So HMS Sirius now beginning to complete her review of the fleet. When the Queen passes the line on board HMS Sirius, they will lower their flag, their message, which says proceed to your destination, and that is the signal for the fleet to start to manoeuvre, to put up their sails, and to set sail westward ho for Australia. The weather now is calm, much as it was on that day, May the 13th, 1787, when the fleet first set out. The captain of that time, Arthur Phillip, wrote in his diary, "It was a fair May morning." Well, it's afternoon now because the timetable has been put back slightly so that the Queen could spend this morning with the people of Portsmouth at the Guildhall. But this afternoon she's aboard HMS Sirius, waving goodbye to the fleet. Probably worth making the point that when the first fleet set out for Australia, there were no fine words, no hurrahs, no brave speech from the king of the day, George III. It was a fleet of shame carrying petty criminals to a land they'd never heard of. Well, we understand the signal has now been given for the fleet to depart, and I wonder what it's like to be on board. Let's go live now to the leader of the fleet, Dr. Jonathan King.
Dr. King, the great adventure is underway.
Well, the Queen did what she said she'd do. She's raised the flag, which, as I understand it, was uniform whiskey Romeo Victor 1. And that's said to us now to weigh anchors, heave away, and have a pleasant voyage to our destination. Now that, of course, is Botany Bay, and we couldn't have hoped, as Australians, for any greater start to the Bicentennial celebrations than to have Her Majesty the Queen farewelling our first fleet. And I think I can say for Australia, we're thrilled to the core.
Is it an emotional moment for you, personally?
Well, I cried this morning at the religious service which the naval chaplain had on board, and I'm so deeply moved now, it's impossible to express it. And I think I speak for hundreds of thousands of Australians. We're proud of our origins, and we're very honoured that the Queen has now seen fit to farewell the First Fleet and start Australia's birthday party. It's Happy Birthday, Australia.
The original convicts obviously had a very hard time on that first voyage. Is it going to be a tough one for you?
Well, the celebrations are over. The work now begins. This expedition has taken 10 years of hard labour to mount. Now we have 8 months and 1 week during which we have to fight our way through stormy seas to Australia. And we've got paying passengers on board, more people joining us through bounty voyages in Australia every day, and we have to pull as a team to try and get there on time and safely. And I can't tell you now whether we're going to do that, and that's why the eyes of Australia are watching us with apprehension, and I hope a few prayers as well.
What are you looking forward to the most?
I'm looking forward to sailing through the heads in Sydney. And I think everybody in Australia will be watching as the First Fleet sail in. And if we can, God willing, arrive there safely, then the whole adventure has been worthwhile.
Dr. King, Godspeed.
Thank you. We need all the prayers we can get.
Well, indeed, our best wishes do go with Dr. King and his fleet of square riggers. And there we see a marvellous aerial shot there of HMS Sirius, with a flotilla of tugs and small sailing ships all around her. The signal has been given. She has passed the review now, and the square riggers will start to put up their sails and set off for Australia. We should remind ourselves of the most tremendous voyage that it was 200 years ago. These square riggers today may look authentic in the way they are, but below decks they have all the modern methods of navigation. They don't simply rely on sail, but remember that 200 years ago, that's all they had. They looked for the breath from the wind that would fill their sails to take them into uncharted waters, 13,000 miles to Australia. It's now up to this fleet not to let the side down. They have promised to make landfall at noon in Sydney, Australia, on January the 26th, 1988, to coincide with the arrival of the first settlers. They must be there on that day in order to make landfall as it was 200 years ago, to start the birthday celebrations in Australia. And so, the moment has come for the Soren Larsen, the flagship of the fleet, to weigh anchor and head out to the Channel. She'll go by way of the Needles and beyond to the open sea. It's worth remembering now, perhaps, the words of the Commodore of the original fleet, Arthur Phillip, when he made landfall in Australia 200 years ago. He wrote, "We have lit a shining light among all the nations of the southern hemisphere. How grand is the prospect that lies before this youthful nation."
And gives the